Nick Michael stood behind the counter of the quick-stop gas station on Route 47. His faded blue uniform shirt was untucked on one side. A coffee stain was near the collar from this morning's rush. He was 41 years old. He had calloused hands and tired eyes that had seen more than anyone in this small town would ever guess. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow across the racks of snacks and the coolers humming against the back wall. It was just past 2 in the afternoon. This was the slow stretch of the day when truckers stopped for fuel and locals wandered in for lottery tickets and cigarettes. The bell above the door chimed. A black Mercedes SUV pulled up to the premium pump outside. Nick watched through the smudged glass as a woman stepped out, her heels clicking against the concrete. She wore a charcoal pantsuit that probably cost more than he made in a month. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Sunglasses were hiding her eyes, even though the sky was overcast. Behind her, a second vehicle parked, a matching black sedan carrying what looked like assistance or security. Victoria Ashford. Nick recognized her immediately. Everyone in the county did. She was the CEO of Ashford Energy Solutions. This was the company that had bought out 3 local businesses in the past year alone. Her face had been on the cover of Forbes twice. She owned the land where the old mill used to stand. She had torn it down to build a distribution center that employed hundreds but paid them barely enough to survive. She strode into the gas station like she owned it too. Maybe she was thinking about buying it. Nothing would surprise Nick anymore. He straightened slightly behind the counter, not out of respect, but out of habit. 8 years of military discipline didn't disappear just because you traded combat boots for sneakers. Victoria pulled off her sunglasses and scanned the store with obvious distaste. Her gaze landed on Nick, assessed him in half a second, and dismissed him just as quickly. She grabbed a bottle of sparkling water from the cooler and approached the register. "Pump 4, she said, sliding a black credit card across the counter. "And this water." Nick rang it up, his movements efficient. "That'll be $67.40. She didn't respond, just stared at the card reader like it was personally inconveniencing her. One of her assistants, a young man in a slim-fit suit, hurried in behind her. "Ms. Ashford, the call with the Singapore office is in 15 minutes. We should really get moving." "I'm aware of my own schedule, Marcus," she said without looking at him. The card reader beeped. Nick handed her the receipt. She didn't take it, just let it sit on the counter between them. "Is there anything else?" Nick asked, his voice neutral. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. She was looking at something behind him, at the small corkboard on the wall where Nick had pinned a child's drawing. It showed a stick figure man next to a smaller stick figure, both of them standing in front of what looked like a rocket ship. The words at the bottom read, "My dad is the best. Love, Sophie." "That your kid?" Victoria asked, and there was something in her tone that wasn't quite curiosity. More like she was cataloging a weakness. "Yes, ma'am. She makes you put her drawings up at work." "That's sweet." Her voice made it sound like anything but. The bell chimed again. An older man in a trucker cap walked in, headed for the coffee station. Nick noticed Victoria's assistant, checking his watch nervously. "You know," Victoria said, leaning slightly against the counter in a way that made it clear she had no intention of hurrying, "I've been thinking about this location. Prime real estate, really. Right off the highway, good visibility. Ashford Energy has been looking to expand our service station network." Nick said nothing. "The current owner, Mr. Patterson, he's what, 75 now? 80? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've made him a very generous offer. He's considering it." Nick's hands rested flat on the counter. He knew about the offer. Patterson had told him last week, his voice tired and defeated. 30 years he'd owned this station. 30 years of honest work. But Victoria Ashford had a way of making offers that weren't really offers at all. She'd already bought the land on either side of the property. She was squeezing him out slowly, methodically, like she did with everything she wanted. "When the sale goes through," Victoria continued, "I'll be making some changes. Modernizing. Automating." She let the word hang in the air. "We probably won't need as many staff." The trucker at the coffee station glanced over, sensing the tension. Nick kept his expression neutral, but something cold settled in his chest. He needed this job. It wasn't much, but it was steady work, and steady work meant he could pay for Sophie's medications. Sophie, who was 7 years old and had type 1 diabetes. Sophie, who needed insulin that cost more every year. Sophie, who was the only reason Nick got out of bed some mornings. "I understand," Nick said quietly. Victoria tilted her head, studying him like he was a particularly uninteresting specimen. "Do you? I wonder." She tucked her sunglasses back on. "People like you think small jobs are safe. Beneath notice. But nothing is beneath my notice, mister." She glanced at his name tag. Michaels. "Nothing at all." She turned and walked toward the door, her heels sharp against the linoleum. Her assistant scrambled to follow. Nick watched her go, his jaw tight. The trucker approached the counter with his coffee, shaking his head. "That woman," he muttered. "Cold as ice." Nick rang up the coffee without responding. Outside, Victoria was about to open her car door when she paused. She was looking at something, her body suddenly rigid. Nick followed her gaze through the window and felt his heart stop. The sound reached him a second later, a deep, rhythmic thudding that grew louder and louder, shaking the windows, rattling the shelves. The fluorescent lights flickered. Outside, debris swirled in sudden violent circles as a massive shadow descended over the parking lot. It was a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, military markings visible on its side. The rotors kicked up a storm of dust and gravel as it touched down directly in front of the gas station pumps. Victoria stumbled backward, her composure cracking for the first time. Her assistant dropped his phone. The trucker spilled his coffee. The side door of the Black Hawk slid open, and 3 soldiers jumped out, their movements precise and urgent. They wore tactical gear. The lead officer, a woman with silver oak leaves on her collar, was already striding toward the gas station entrance. She pushed through the door, her eyes scanning the interior until they landed on Nick. Then she stopped, stood at attention, and saluted. "Warrant Officer Michaels," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, United States Army Special Operations Command. Sir, we need you to come with us immediately." The world seemed to freeze. The trucker's jaw dropped. Victoria Ashford slowly turned, her face white, her sunglasses dangling from nerveless fingers. Her assistant made a small, choking sound. Nick didn't move. His hands were still flat on the counter, but something in his posture had changed. Something had shifted behind his eyes. "I'm not in the service anymore, Colonel," he said quietly. Hayes didn't lower her salute. "Sir, I'm aware of your discharge status, but we have a situation that requires your specific expertise." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavier. "Operation Nightfall, sir. The protocol you designed. It's been compromised." Nick's face went pale. His hands curled into fists on the counter. "That's classified." "Yes, sir. And the only person who can fix it is standing in a gas station in the middle of nowhere." She finally lowered her salute. "There are 12 operators in the field right now, sir. Their extraction depends on you." Victoria stepped forward, her voice sharp with confusion and something that might have been fear. "What is happening? Who is this man?" Hayes didn't even look at her. "This man, ma'am, is Chief Warrant Officer Nicholas Michaels, one of the most decorated intelligence operatives in the history of Army Special Operations. His call sign is Spectre." She turned back to Nick. "And right now, he's the only thing standing between 12 American soldiers and a very bad ending." Nick closed his eyes. For a moment, he was somewhere else. Somewhere hot and loud and full of smoke. He could hear voices on a radio, desperate and breaking up. He could feel the weight of impossible choices pressing down on his chest. "I have a daughter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She gets out of school at 3:30. I have to pick her up. I have to give her insulin." "Sir," Hayes said, and her voice softened just slightly, "we have already contacted your daughter's school. We have a team standing by to ensure her safety and medical needs. She will be taken care of. But those 12 soldiers, they have families too. Children. And they're running out of time." Nick opened his eyes. He looked at the drawing on the corkboard, at the stick figures holding hands, at the rocket ship that Sophie had carefully colored in red and blue. Then he looked at Victoria Ashford, who was staring at him like she had never seen him before, like she was seeing him for the first time. He reached under the counter and pulled out an old military watch, scratched and worn, the crystal cracked. He strapped it onto his wrist with movements that were automatic, instinctive, movements that belonged to a different man, a different life. Then he walked out from behind the counter, past Victoria, past her stunned assistant, past the trucker who was now recording everything on his phone. At the door, he paused, looked back at Victoria. "I'll be needing that job when I get back," he said. "My daughter's insulin costs $400 a month." Then he was gone, striding toward the helicopter, the rotor wash whipping his faded uniform shirt around him. The soldiers fell in behind him, and within seconds the Black Hawk was lifting off, tilting into the gray sky, disappearing toward the horizon. Victoria Ashford stood in the gas station parking lot, watching it go. Her hands were shaking. Her perfect composure had shattered completely. "Who was that?" her assistant whispered. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Nick Michaels had not always been a gas station attendant. That was just the man he had become, the man he had needed to become, after everything else fell apart. 10 years ago, he was Chief Warrant Officer Nicholas Michaels, call sign Spectre. He was assigned to the Intelligence Support Activity, one of the most secretive units in the entire United States military. His job was to design and implement communication protocols for special operations teams in hostile territory. He was the man who made sure the operators could talk to each other, could call for extraction, could coordinate with air support when everything was chaos and fire and death. He was brilliant at it. Not because he was a genius, though his IQ scores suggested otherwise, but because he understood, on a bone-deep level, what it meant to be alone in the dark with nothing but a radio between you and oblivion. He understood because he had been there himself, early in his career. He was pinned down in a valley in Afghanistan with a broken radio and 11 hours until dawn. He had fixed that radio with nothing but a pocket knife and sheer stubborn refusal to die. He had called in the extraction that saved his entire team. And then he had spent the next 15 years making sure no one else would ever have to jury-rig their survival the way he had. Operation Nightfall was his masterpiece. It was a communication protocol so sophisticated, so layered with redundancies and encryption, that it had been used for the most sensitive operations in the world. Hostage rescues. High-value target extractions. Missions that never made the news because they were never supposed to happen at all. But then came the mission in Syria, the one that ended everything. It was supposed to be routine. A team of 12 operators extracting a defector who had critical intelligence on chemical weapons. Nick was running communications from a forward operating base, coordinating the extraction. He was watching the dots on his screen that represented real human beings moving through a city that wanted them dead. Something went wrong. It always did eventually. The defector was compromised. The extraction point was ambushed. And Nick sat there listening to his people die, unable to do anything but keep the channels open, keep relaying their positions, keep hoping their backup would arrive in time. 8 of them made it out. 4 didn't. Nick knew their names. He knew their families. He had met their children at unit barbecues, had watched them play tag while the adults drank beer and pretended the world wasn't as dark as they all knew it was. When it was over, when the after-action reports were filed and the medals were distributed and the funerals were held, Nick walked into his commanding officer's office and submitted his resignation. "You can't quit," the general had said. "You're too valuable. The protocols you designed, the systems you built, they save lives every single day." "Not enough lives," Nick had replied. "Not the ones that mattered." He had walked away, changed his name and everything but legal documents, moved to a small town where no one knew him, where he could be anonymous, where the weight of what he had done and failed to do could slowly crush him in private. And then Sophie happened. She was the daughter of his sister Laura, who had died in a car accident 3 years ago. There was no father in the picture, no other family. Just a 4-year-old girl with huge brown eyes and a medical condition that required constant monitoring. Nick had taken her in without hesitation. It was the first time in years he had felt something other than the cold weight of guilt. Sophie needed him. Sophie depended on him. Sophie looked at him like he was a hero, even though he knew, deep in his bones, that heroes didn't let their people die. He got a job at the gas station because it had steady hours, and Patterson was kind enough not to ask too many questions. He built a life that was small and quiet and focused entirely on keeping Sophie safe, keeping Sophie healthy, keeping Sophie from ever knowing the darkness her uncle carried. Every morning he made her breakfast. Every afternoon he picked her up from school. Every evening he helped her with her homework and checked her blood sugar and read her stories about brave princesses who saved themselves. He was there for every insulin injection, every doctor's appointment, every nightmare about monsters under the bed. He was there, and that was what mattered. That was what he told himself. But the world Nick had left behind didn't forget him. The protocols he designed were still in use. The operators who survived because of his systems still remembered his name. And somewhere, in the vast machinery of military intelligence, there was a file with his picture and his skills, and a note that said, "In case of emergency, contact Spectre." Now it was an emergency. Now 12 soldiers were trapped somewhere, their communications compromised, their extraction window closing, and the only person who understood the vulnerabilities in the Nightfall Protocol, the only person who could patch them in real time while a mission was ongoing, was Nick Michaels, the man who had spent 10 years trying to disappear. The Black Hawk flew east, racing toward a secure facility that officially didn't exist. Nick sat in the back, his eyes closed, his mind already working through the problem. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes sat across from him, watching his face for any sign of the man she had read about in classified briefings. "Sir," she said, pitching her voice above the rotor noise, "I need to brief you on the current situation." Nick opened his eyes. "Go ahead." 3 hours ago, a team designated Go-7 was inserted into hostile territory to extract a high-value asset. They were using the Nightfall Protocol for communications, as per standard procedure. She paused, her jaw tightening. 90 minutes into the operation, their signals went dark. Nick's expression didn't change, but his hands curled slightly against his thighs. "We believe the protocol has been compromised by a hostile actor. Someone who has found a way to jam the frequencies while simultaneously spoofing false signals to mislead our support elements." She leaned forward. "Our techs have been trying to break through, but the encryption layers you designed are working against us. We can't reach them, and they can't reach us." "Where are they now?" "Last known position was inside an urban center, approximately 4 kilometers from the extraction point. We have aerial assets standing by, but without communication we can't coordinate. If we send them in blind, we risk catastrophic friendly fire incidents." Nick nodded slowly. The Nightfall Protocol was designed to be unbreakable. He had built it that way on purpose, layering redundancy upon redundancy, creating a system that could survive anything short of total equipment destruction. But every system had weaknesses. He knew that better than anyone. "I need access to the original architecture files," he said, "and a direct line to whatever equipment Go-7 is carrying. If I can find the vulnerability, I can patch it. But I'll need to do it live, while they're in the field." Hayes nodded. "We anticipated that. Everything you need, we'll be waiting for you when we land." She hesitated, then added, "Sir, I want you to know, the team leader on Go-7, his name is Captain Marcus Webb. He has a daughter. She's 6 years old." Nick felt something twist in his chest. "Of course she is. I've been telling my team about you for years," Webb said. "When I was a lieutenant, I studied your protocols like they were scripture. You saved my life before I ever met you." He paused. "And now you've done it again." Nick was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I haven't touched this system in 10 years. "No, sir. But you built it. And right now, you're the only one who can save it." The helicopter banked hard, descending toward a cluster of buildings hidden among the trees. Nick looked out the window, at the approaching facility, at the soldiers waiting on the tarmac, at the life he thought he had escaped. Sophie's drawing flashed through his mind. The stick figures. The rocket ship. My dad is the best. He wasn't her father. He was her uncle. But she called him Dad anyway, had started doing it about 6 months after she came to live with him, and he had never corrected her. He couldn't. The word meant too much. It was the only thing that still made him feel human. Now he was flying toward a situation where 12 people might die, where a little girl might lose her father, where everything he had run from was waiting to swallow him whole. He closed his eyes again and saw the faces of the 4 operators he had lost in Syria. He saw their children at those barbecues, laughing and playing and unaware that their parents would never come home. Then he saw Sophie. Her big brown eyes, her gap-toothed smile, the careful way she drew rocket ships because she knew he used to work with things that flew. The helicopter touched down. Nick opened his eyes, unbuckled his harness, and stepped out into the chaos. Back at the quick stop, Victoria Ashford sat in her Mercedes, unable to move. Her assistant had stopped asking questions after she snapped at him the 3rd time. Now he just sat in the front seat, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice that his boss was having some kind of breakdown. The video was already spreading. The trucker had posted it immediately, and within 30 minutes it had been picked up by local news, then national, then international. The headline on every site was some variation of the same thing: gas station clerk revealed as secret military hero. Victoria watched the footage on her phone, the same 30-second clip playing over and over. Nick behind the counter, his face blank and tired. The helicopter descending like something out of a movie. The soldier saluting him, calling him sir, using words like decorated and operative and specter. She had mocked him. She had threatened his job. She had looked at him like he was nothing, like he was beneath her notice, like his daughter's drawing on the corkboard was a sign of weakness instead of love. And he had been, what, some kind of secret agent? A hero? Someone important enough that the United States Army sent a Black Hawk helicopter to a gas station in the middle of nowhere just to get him? Victoria Ashford had built her entire career on reading people, on assessing their worth in a glance, on knowing exactly who was useful and who was disposable. She had never been wrong. She had never missed something this big. But she had looked at Nick Michaels and seen a gas station attendant. Nothing more. Her phone buzzed. It was her PR director, frantic about the optics. Apparently, someone on social media had already connected Victoria's presence at the gas station with the video. They were calling her the villain. They were saying she had been cruel to a war hero. Victoria didn't answer the phone. She just sat there, staring at her hands, thinking about the way Nick had looked at her before he walked out. I'll be needing that job when I get back. My daughter's insulin costs $400 a month. He wasn't bargaining. He wasn't threatening. He was just stating a fact. He needed the job. His daughter needed the medicine. And he was walking toward a helicopter that might carry him to his death because someone, somewhere, needed him more. Victoria had never needed anyone. That was how she had survived. That was how she had built her empire, by being the one who needed nothing, who wanted only power, who could look at a person and calculate their value down to the decimal point. But Nick Michaels had looked at her like she was the one who was worthless. Like all her money and all her power and all her ruthless efficiency added up to exactly nothing. And the worst part was, he might have been right. The secure facility was a maze of concrete corridors and humming servers, manned by people who didn't officially exist doing work that would never be acknowledged. Nick was escorted to a operations center at the heart of the complex, a room filled with screens and consoles, and the quiet tension of people trying very hard not to panic. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes introduced him to the team, a mix of communications specialists and intelligence analysts who had been working the problem for hours without success. They looked at Nick with a mixture of hope and skepticism. He was a legend, yes, but he was also a man who hadn't touched classified systems in a decade. The world had moved on. The technology had evolved. Who was to say he could still do what he had once done? Nick ignored the looks. He sat down at a console, pulled up the Nightfall protocol architecture, and began to work. The first hour was the hardest. The system had been updated dozens of times since he designed it. Layers upon layers of modifications made by people who understood the protocol's surface but not its soul. Nick had to dig through all of it, stripping away the changes, getting back to the core architecture he had built with his own hands. As he worked, updates came in from the field. Ghost 7 was still alive, still moving, still trying to reach the extraction point. But they were being hunted now, tracked by hostile forces who had somehow gotten ahead of them. Without communication, they were blind. Without support, they were alone. Nick found the vulnerability at the 90-minute mark. It was subtle, almost elegant in its simplicity. Someone had exploited a timing gap in the encryption handshake, a gap so small that his original design had considered it negligible. But technology had improved. Computers had gotten faster. What was once impossible was now merely difficult. He wrote a patch. It took 20 minutes, his fingers flying over the keyboard, his mind working at a speed he had thought was lost to him. The analysts around him watched in silence, barely breathing. When it was done, he uploaded the patch directly to the field equipment. It would take a few minutes to propagate, a few more for Ghost 7 to recognize that their comms were back online. Nick sat back. His hands were shaking. "Is it working?" Hayes asked, her voice tight. Nick didn't answer. He was watching the screen, watching the dots that represented 12 human beings, 12 soldiers with families and children and lives that mattered. The radio crackled. A voice came through, broken and desperate, but unmistakably alive. "Command, this is Ghost 7 Actual. We have comms restored. Repeat, comms restored. Requesting immediate extraction. Hostile forces closing on our position." The room erupted. Analysts were shouting coordinates. Pilots were being scrambled. The entire machinery of military rescue grinding into motion. Hayes grabbed Nick's shoulder. "You did it." Nick was still staring at the screen. "Not yet," he said quietly. "Get them home first." "Then I did it." The extraction took another 2 hours. Nick stayed at the console the entire time, monitoring the communications, ready to patch any new vulnerabilities that might emerge. He listened to the chatter of the helicopter pilots, the terse updates from Ghost 7, the growing relief as the distance between the team and safety grew smaller and smaller. When the Black Hawk finally lifted off with all 12 operators aboard, when Captain Marcus Webb's voice came over the radio saying they were clear, when the tension in the room finally broke into something that might have been celebration, Nick quietly stood up and walked out. He found an empty hallway and leaned against the wall, his eyes closed, his chest heaving. The adrenaline was fading, and in its place was something else. Something he had been running from for 10 years. He had saved them. 12 soldiers were going home to their families because of what he had done. But he couldn't stop thinking about the 4 who hadn't come home. The 4 whose names were carved into his memory, whose faces he saw every time he closed his eyes. The 4 who had died while he sat in a room just like this one, listening to them on the radio, unable to do anything but bear witness. "Mr. Michaels?" He opened his eyes. A young analyst was standing a few feet away, looking uncertain. "Sir, there's a video call for you." "From the team. Captain Webb specifically requested to speak with you." Nick straightened, wiped his face, followed the analyst back to the operations center. The screen showed a cramped helicopter interior, 12 exhausted soldiers packed together like sardines. Their faces were dirty, their eyes hollow, but they were alive. Every single one of them. Captain Webb was in the center of the frame. He was younger than Nick expected, maybe mid-30s, with a beard that regulations probably didn't allow and a look in his eyes that Nick recognized. It was the look of someone who had just walked through fire and couldn't quite believe they had made it out. "Spectre," Webb said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you." Nick shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. Just go home. Hug your daughter." Webb's eyes filled with tears. He wiped them away roughly, embarrassed. "Sir, I've been telling my team about you for years. When I was a lieutenant, I studied your protocols like they were scripture. You saved my life before I ever met you." He paused. "And now you've done it again." The other soldiers were nodding. Some of them raised their hands in salutes. Others just stared at the screen with expressions of raw gratitude. Nick felt something break open inside him. Something that had been locked away for a very long time. "I lost 4 people once," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "In Syria. I've spent 10 years thinking about them. Thinking about what I should have done differently." Webb leaned forward. "Sir, I know about Syria. Everyone does. And I need you to hear something." He paused, making sure he had Nick's full attention. "You saved 8 people that day. 8 families that are whole because of you. And today, you saved 12 more. His voice hardened. The 4 you lost, they would want you to remember the 8. They would want you to keep going. That's what soldiers do. Nick couldn't speak. His throat was too tight. Hayes stepped forward, her voice gentle. Sir, we have a car waiting to take you home. Your daughter is safe. She's been asking for you. Nick nodded, looked at the screen one more time, at the 12 faces staring back at him. Stay safe, he said. All of you. We will, sir. Because of you. The screen went dark. Nick stood there for a moment, alone with the ghosts that had haunted him for so long. But they felt different now. Lighter. Less like weights dragging him down and more like hands pushing him forward. He turned and walked toward the door, toward the car, toward Sophie, toward home. The news cycle went insane. The video of the gas station had gone viral, and now it was being paired with leaked information about the rescue mission. Anonymous sources confirmed that a former military operative had been called out of retirement to save a special operations team. Speculation ran wild. People were demanding to know more about the mysterious gas station clerk, who was apparently some kind of secret hero. Victoria Ashford watched the coverage from her office, her stomach churning. Every news segment mentioned her, showed footage of her walking into the gas station, highlighted the fact that she had been present when the helicopter arrived. The narrative was already set. She was the cold-hearted CEO who had dismissed a hero, who had threatened his job, who had treated him like dirt. Her PR team was in damage control mode, but there was only so much they could do. The court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. Her phone rang. It was the chairman of her board. Victoria, we need to talk. I know. The optics on this are catastrophic. Stock is down 8% since this morning. I know. What are you going to do about it? Victoria looked out her window at the city below. At the buildings she owned, the companies she controlled, the empire she had built through ruthless efficiency and cold calculation. I'm going to do the right thing, she said. The chairman paused. The right thing? Victoria, since when do you care about the right thing? She didn't answer. She just hung up the phone. That night, she drove to the address her assistant had found for her. It was a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the paint was peeling and the parking lot was cracked and the American dream went to die quietly. She found Nick's door and knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. She was about to leave when the door opened. Nick stood there, still wearing his faded gas station uniform, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Ms. Ashford. Mr. Michaels. She swallowed. Can I come in? He studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. The apartment was small but clean. There was a couch with a knitted blanket draped over it, a television playing a cartoon with the volume low, and a kitchen table covered with drawings. Children's drawings. Rocket ships and stick figures and rainbows. Sophie was sitting at the table, her tongue poking out in concentration as she colored. She looked up when Victoria entered, her eyes curious but unafraid. Hi, she said. Are you my dad's friend? Victoria felt something crack in her chest. I'm not sure, she admitted. I hope I can be. Nick sat down at the table next to Sophie, one hand resting gently on her back. What do you want, Ms. Ashford? Victoria took a breath. I came to apologize. Nick's expression didn't change. I was wrong, she continued. About you. About everything. I looked at you and I saw what I expected to see. Someone beneath me. Someone I could dismiss. She shook her head. I've built my whole life on that kind of thinking. Judge fast, move faster, never look back. But I looked at you and I was so wrong it makes me sick. Nick was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Why are you really here? Victoria reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a document. A contract. I want to offer you a job, she said. Not at the gas station. At Ashford Energy. She slid the contract across the table. Director of Security Operations. You would have full authority over all safety and security protocols for every facility in the company. You would report directly to me. And you would never have to worry about affording your daughter's medication again. Nick looked at the contract but didn't touch it. "This isn't charity," Victoria said quickly. "It's not guilt money. I need someone who can see what I can't see. Someone who understands that people are more than their appearances." She paused. "I need someone to keep me honest." Sophie looked up from her drawing. "Dad," she said, "what's honest mean?" Nick smiled slightly. "It means telling the truth, sweetheart. Even when it's hard." Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went back to coloring. Nick finally looked at Victoria. Really looked at her. And for the first time, he saw something other than the cold executive who had threatened his livelihood. He saw someone lost. Someone afraid. Someone desperately trying to figure out how to be better. "I have conditions," he said. "Name them." "I pick Sophie up from school every day at 3:30. No exceptions. Done. I take her to every doctor's appointment. No questions asked. Agreed. And I work from home when she's sick. I don't care what crisis is happening. She comes first." Victoria nodded. "Always." Nick was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the contract and read through it carefully. The salary was more than he had made in the last 5 years combined. The benefits included full medical coverage for Sophie, an education fund, even a housing allowance. He set the contract down, looked at Sophie, looked at Victoria. "One more thing," he said. "What?" "Patterson's gas station. You don't buy it. You leave him alone." Victoria blinked. "That property is worth. I don't care what it's worth." Nick's voice was quiet but firm. "That man gave me a job when no one else would. He didn't ask questions. He just saw someone who needed help and he helped." She met his eyes. "That's what you want to be, right? Someone who helps?" Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "I'll withdraw the offer." Nick picked up a pen from the table and signed the contract. "When do I start?" Victoria smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "Monday," she said. "We have a lot of work to do." After she left, Nick sat at the table with Sophie, watching her finish her drawing. It was a picture of a helicopter, big and black, with a stick figure standing next to it. "That's you, Dad," Sophie said, pointing at the figure. "You went in the helicopter to help people." Nick felt his throat tighten. "Yeah, sweetheart. I did." Sophie looked at him with her big, brown eyes. "Are you going to help more people?" He pulled her into a hug, holding her tight against his chest. "I'm going to try," he said. "That's all any of us can do." Outside, the night was quiet. The stars were out, scattered across the sky like promises. And somewhere, 12 soldiers were home with their families, alive because a gas station clerk had answered a call he thought he had left behind forever. 6 months later, Nick stood in a conference room at Ashford Energy headquarters, presenting his quarterly security review to the board of directors. He wore a suit now, though he still felt strange in it. He missed the comfort of his old uniform, the anonymity of it. But Sophie had picked out the tie, a bright blue one with little rockets on it, and that made it bearable. The board members listened attentively. They had been skeptical at first, this former gas station attendant, that Victoria had plucked out of obscurity. But the results spoke for themselves. In 6 months, Nick had overhauled the company's entire security infrastructure. He had identified vulnerabilities that previous consultants had missed. He had implemented protocols that had prevented 3 separate industrial espionage attempts. More importantly, he had changed the culture. He had insisted on regular safety drills, on proper training for all employees, on treating security not as an afterthought, but as a fundamental priority. The workers respected him because he treated them like people, not like problems to be managed. After the meeting, Victoria found him in his office. He was looking at a framed photo on his desk, Sophie's school picture, her smile bright and gap-toothed. "Good presentation," she said. "Thanks." She sat down across from him. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." Nick looked up, waiting. 6 months ago, when I walked into that gas station, I was the worst version of myself. Victoria's voice was quiet, reflective. I had built my whole identity around being cold, being ruthless, being in control. I thought that was what strength looked like. She shook her head. I was so wrong. You've changed, Nick said. I've watched it happen. Because of you. Victoria leaned forward. You didn't owe me anything. I had threatened your job, mocked you in front of others, treated you like you were nothing. And when I showed up at your door, you could have turned me away. You could have enjoyed watching my company burn. She paused. But you didn't. You gave me a chance I didn't deserve. Nick was quiet for a moment. Then he said, when I was in the military, I lost people. People I was supposed to protect. For 10 years, I carried that guilt like a stone in my chest. I thought it would crush me eventually. He looked at the photo of Sophie, but then I got a second chance. A little girl who needed someone to take care of her. And I realized that guilt doesn't have to crush you. It can push you forward if you let it. Victoria nodded slowly. Is that why you gave me a chance? Nick smiled slightly. Partly. But also because I saw something in you that night. Something you were trying to hide. What? Fear, he said simply. You were scared. Scared of being wrong. Scared of being vulnerable. Scared of having to change. He shrugged. I know what that fear feels like. I've lived with it for a long time. And I know you can't face it alone. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you, she said. For seeing me. Thank you for letting yourself be seen. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and groaned. Board meeting in 10 minutes. They want to discuss the quarterly projections. Nick stood up, straightening his rocket ship tie. Better not keep him waiting. As they walked toward the elevator, Victoria said, By the way, Patterson's gas station. He's decided to retire next month. His son is taking over the business. Nick smiled. That's good to hear. The son asked if you'd come by sometime. Apparently Patterson talks about you constantly. The mysterious hero who used to work the counter? He's very proud. Nick shook his head, but he was still smiling. I'm not a hero. Victoria pressed the elevator button. No, she agreed. You're something better. You're a dad who showed up when it mattered. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside together, two people who had been strangers 6 months ago, who had seen the worst of each other, who had somehow found their way to something that looked like respect. Maybe even friendship. As the elevator rose, Nick thought about Sophie. About the drawing she had given him that morning, another rocket ship with 2 stick figures inside. She had labeled them Dad and Sophie, space explorers. He thought about the 12 soldiers who were still alive because he had answered a call he thought he had left behind. He thought about the 4 who hadn't made it home, whose names were still carved into his memory, whose faces he still saw sometimes in the dark. But the weight was lighter now. The guilt was still there, but it had transformed into something else. Purpose. Drive. A reason to keep going. He wasn't running anymore. He was standing still. Standing strong. Standing for something. And that, he realized, was what it meant to be a hero. Not the medals, or the missions, or the dramatic helicopter rescues. Just the choice, made over and over again, to show up for the people who needed you. My dad is the best. That's what Sophie's drawing had said all those months ago in the gas station. Nick intended to prove her right. Sometimes we look at people and we think we know everything about them. We see the uniform, the job title, the car they drive, the neighborhood they live in. We make our judgments in seconds, confident in our ability to sort the worthy from the worthless. But the truth is, we don't know anything at all. The person behind the counter might be a secret hero. The single parent struggling to afford medicine might have saved more lives than we can count. The quiet one in the corner, the one who never speaks up, never seeks attention, never asks for recognition, they might be carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. We don't see the sacrifices. We don't see the choices. We don't see the moments when ordinary people become extraordinary, when they step forward into the fire because someone, somewhere, needs them to. Nick Michaels was a gas station attendant. He was also a father, a protector, a man who had lost everything and rebuilt himself from the ashes. He was a hero, not because of what he did in the military, but because of what he did every single day, showing up, taking care of the people who depended on him, choosing love over fear. Victoria Ashford learned something that day at the gas station. She learned that power means nothing if you use it to tear people down. She learned that true strength comes from lifting others up, from admitting when you're wrong, from having the courage to change. And Sophie Michaels, 7 years old with big brown eyes and a love for rocket ships, she learned that her dad was exactly who she always thought he was. The best. Subscribe if you believe that true heroes don't need recognition. They just need to know they made a difference. Comment the word Spectre if you think Nick Michaels deserves his piece. And remember, the next time you look at someone and think you know their story, you probably don't. Everyone has a battle they're fighting. Everyone has a story they're not telling. The question is whether we have the grace to see it.